On Nationwide this evening, we hear the stories of two religious men whose work left legacies of enormous positive benefit for their parishes during their lifetimes and for years after they died. We travel to Donegal and to Laois Carlow to hear their stories. You're welcome to Nationwide. I think it's fair to say that education changes lives and plays a very important part in the overall success of a country. And while these days Ireland is promoted worldwide as a nation with a long tradition of educational endeavour, it wasn't always the case. If you wind the clock back, say, 250 years to the penal laws, when a large percentage of the Irish population was denied an education, it was the lucky few who were educated abroad, and many of them returned then as adults to try to make a difference. And one of those lucky few privileged people who went away to be educated was Daniel Delany from Mount Rath in County Laois. He was educated in France and he was ordained a priest in 1770. Then he returned to Ireland in 1777 and set about his mission of educating both adults and children. He founded two religious orders, the Brigidines and the Patricians, and they are both active all around the world today. Bishop Delany died on the 9th of July, that's this day, 200 years ago, and Helen McInerney has his story.
This is the townland of Paddock, near Mount Rath in County Laois. It was here that Daniel Delany was born in 1747. In the 18th century, the majority of Irish people lived in poverty and squalor because of the harsh penal laws that were in place at the time.
My father, Peter Bennett, he bought the farm here in 1956. The auction for the farm was actually here at this house. Just after he buying it, a neighbour came up to him and told him to mind this house, that this house was special. This house is the birthplace of a bishop. So this was just one of several holdings that were here on the farm at the time. I believe there were tenant farmers. I believe at a young age his father died and he had to move into Mount Rath, and he eventually moved in with an aunt in there. So he was here for a few years, history has it, before he moved into Mount Rath.
As a young Catholic boy growing up in Ireland in the 1740s, it was almost impossible to receive an education. The penal laws outlawed the Catholic education system and forced it underground.
These were the penal times, and there were no formal schools, and Catholics didn't have formal schooling, they had to go to hedge schools.
It's said locally that Daniel Delany attended a hedge school a few kilometres from his home.
He went to a hedge school in Briscola, and that would have been about 5 kilometres from his. So from the age of 6 to 10 he would have had to walk the 6 kilometres, 5 kilometres, 6 kilometres back and forward every day to that hedge school in rain and whatever else.
He must have been really determined to get an education.
Yes, his mother was very determined to educate him and get him out of the kind of small holdings of the tenant farmers and get something better for him.
Daniel's father died when Daniel was a young boy, and he moved into Mount Rath to live with his aunts, the Fitzpatricks. Some members of this family were Protestant, and with their help he travelled to France, where he received an education and studied for the priesthood.
In those days it was a very cold country for Catholics and for Presbyterians, because the penal laws were in vogue at the time, and it meant, I suppose, really lack of education, lack of economic life, great poverty, and generally a sort of a downtrodden people.
After some 16 years in France, Daniel Delany heard the penal laws had lessened in severity, and he decided to return to Ireland.
Around 1777 he came back to Mount Rath, his mother, and he was that time ordained a priest, and he wanted to minister to the Catholics in Mount Rath, but he kind of got very disillusioned because they hadn't much faith or much time for religion really, and he decided he was going back to France, but the mother persuaded him to stay in Ireland. So then the bishop sent him to Tullow as a curate in Tullow, and he found him just as bad down there.
But he stayed there?
He stayed in Tullow, yes, and he decided to do something about them. So he started up the Sunday schools and different things to try and educate people there, and he got some women together and he got some men together to help him with those schools.
Did that inspire you to become a Christian brother?
Sort of. Would have been a brother who used to go around called Brother Cyprian Kennedy, and he came to the school telling us all the lovely things were in Tullow, and that would have kind of inspired me.
He came back full of enthusiasm, found it was very ineffective. He's preaching, he's visiting to families, and he's trying to, shall we say, improve the lot of the people. But he did get a sudden flash of inspiration when he saw a group of children playing, and they were singing a hymn, Ave Maris Stella, which is Hail, Star of the Sea. So he then decided that he would offer to teach them hymns, and he found that there was a great uptake among the young people in the hymns. So they started from there, and they started with various classes. He had these confraternities which he set up for adults. Up to then, young people in the area, the very poor, which is the vast majority, were totally illiterate. So the actual learning to read in English was a big step forward, and of course that was very much a thing that they wanted to do. So out of that then, he started the Sunday schools. The members of the Confraternity of Christian Doctrine began to teach in those schools, and out of that then came eventually the Patrician and Brigidine orders.
Social conditions overall were not good. Now, Bishop Delany decided he would try to do something about that, and what he came up with was education. So he founded then the two congregations, Brigidines and Patricians, and since that they spread around Ireland and eventually around the world to various places. This museum in honour of Daniel Delany was opened in 2007, and it contains a lot of the artefacts concerning Daniel Delany's life. Along this corridor,
when Daniel Delany was in France, he made important contacts. One of these was a woman who played a crucial role in the training of the Brigidine sisters in Tullow.
This woman, Judith Wogan Brown, is a very important person in the Brigidine history, because she was the one who educated the first Brigidine sisters. When she was a young girl, she was sent out to France. Well, she went to Belgium to the Benedictine nuns there in Ypres. Now, they say that she had an aunt or some relative there who was a member of the congregation, and that's where she did her study. Now, how did she meet Daniel Delany? We're not 100% sure, except I presume that she would have gone to France maybe for her holidays or that when the school was closed, and maybe may have met Daniel Delany there, because there were a lot of Irish priests out there at that time. He became our spiritual director there.
Judith Wogan Brown was from a wealthy family in County Kildare. Her family estate, Castle Brown, is Clongowes Wood College today.
When she came back from France to Clongowes Wood, or the estate there, she felt that the life that they were living didn't suit her type of life. So she knew Father Delany was in Tullow by that stage. He was probably a curate, and she came here and was able to buy her own residence. We don't know where that was, and that's where she lived. And of course, then she would have got to know, he would have realised how valuable she was for his new congregation. And she probably, some say she was our first general, if you like. She looked after it and often did the work of the superior there.
Judith Wogan Brown was just one of the important people in Bishop Delany's life. Another woman, Mary Dawson from Tullow, was described by Bishop Delany as saintly and holy. Bishop Delany, who lived on the outskirts of Tullow town in this house, lived through turbulent times. In 1798, another priest, Father Murphy, the rebel leader from County Wexford, is said to have been on his way to visit Bishop Delany in Tullow when he was captured and executed. Bishop Delany may have spent almost 40 years in Tullow, and his influence is evident throughout the town. But the people of Mount Rath in County Laois, where Bishop Delany was born, have recently erected a sculpture by Michael Burke to remember their famous son.
He was a wonderful man, we thought. He did exceptional work at a terrible time in our history. The time he did it was after the 98 rebellion, the time that Dr. Delany brought the Brigidines and the patricians here was in 1809. That was just within 10 years of the 98 rising in Wexford. So the country was in terrible turmoil. And he was a brave, very brave man to do this because there was terrible animosity towards him. There was no education for not only poorer people, for about over 90% of the population are uneducated. The idea was, we rule, keep them ignorant.
Bishop Delany is also credited with organising one of the first Corpus Christi processions and with the tradition of ringing the Angelus bell. He was also responsible for the completion of Carlow College in 1793, where his archive is held. 200 years after his death in 1814, the people of Tullow and Mount Rath celebrate his life and the contributions he made to the two towns and to education in Ireland and all over the world.
This week, the Patrician Brothers and the Brigidine Sisters are celebrating the life of their founder, Bishop Daniel Delany, who died on this day 200 years ago. Well, now we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll have the story of a Donegal priest whose life in more recent times has had a very positive impact on the community in Glencullen Kill. We'll talk to you again in a couple of minutes.